The bruise was exactly the shape of a saucer rim, dark blue and throbbing faintly on the inside of her left forearm. Elena Sanchez, 26 years old and intellectually capable of commanding an international research team, was currently using that bruised arm to balance 3 plates of microgreens and foie gras, each one priced higher than her monthly rent. The Meridian didn't have a sign outside. Its address was only passed through whispers among the kind of people who believed silence equaled exclusivity. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged mahogany, seared scallops, and old money, a smell Elena had learned to associate with her own crushing shame. If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. For 5 years, Elena had dedicated her life to the meticulous study of language. She held a master's degree in modern linguistics and Middle Eastern studies, with a dissertation that had been lauded as groundbreaking by her Georgetown professors. She could translate 13th-century poetry, argue geopolitical theory in 3 different languages, and read the nuances of regional Arabic dialects like others read street signs. Yet, here she was, wearing a starched black apron, smiling faintly at patrons who looked through her, not at her. Her debt, a crushing $100,000 weight from that prestigious education, meant her professional goal was not to publish, but to be an invisible, efficient ghost. The kitchen computer chimed, the soundtrack to her waking nightmare. Sanchez, Table 4 needs their check. Table 7 wants you. And the Thorn party is here. Do not mess this up. Mark Peterson, the general manager, materialized next to her. Peterson was a man whose entire personality was built on fear, terrorizing the staff while worshiping the wealthy clients. His tie was perpetually perfect, and his eyes darted nervously to the heavy oak door of the private dining room. The Thorn party? Elena asked, her blood running cold. She knew the name. Julian Thorn. Thorn Global. The kind of man who didn't just buy a city block, he bought the entire zip code. Julian Thorn. He's in the private room. He's particular, Peterson hissed, straightening his tie. Everything is yes, Mr. Thorn. Right away, Mr. Thorn. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't exist. Got it? Got it, Mr. Peterson, Elena said, her voice a flat, professional monotone that hid the bitter heat rising in her chest. Meanwhile, 42 stories above the noise and grit of the city, Julian Thorn stared out of his floor-to-ceiling office window. The Chicago skyline was reduced to a blueprint he intended to redraw. At 35, Julian was frighteningly young to be a global CEO, but his success was due entirely to a singular, relentless focus that viewed the world as a complex machine where all variables, including people, were transactional. His tailored suit felt like armor, necessary protection against the sloppy incompetence he saw everywhere. He wasn't thinking about dinner. He was thinking about the $2 billion green energy infrastructure deal with a consortium in Riyadh. The documents were spread across his massive black desk. The same documents he was about to review over a late dinner. The deal had stalled. The communication was hostile. His lead translator, the only person who truly understood the cultural intricacies, had quit 2 days ago. Julian rubbed the space between his brows. He needed a win. He needed absolute control, and the one thing he couldn't control was the increasingly strained language barrier. He felt a deep, familiar surge of contempt for anything that was not perfectly efficient. That included anyone who could not maintain perfect order, like the inept service staff at the restaurant he was headed to. He glanced at his associate, Mr. Cole, who was anxiously collecting the papers. Cole, remind me why we tolerate the mediocrity of service at the Meridian? Cole, older and more gentle, sighed. Exclusivity, sir. And they have the best private dining room set up in the city. Exclusivity, Julian scoffed, standing up. It just means they charge more for the same inadequate service. Let's go. I want to close this loop before midnight. He descended in his private elevator, insulated from the rest of the world, carrying the weight of his fortune and his professional anxieties. He was completely unaware that the solution to his multi-billion-dollar problem, and the unexpected cure for his profound isolation, was currently tying a black apron around her waist, terrified of serving him water. Elena grabbed the heavy silver pitcher of ice water, its condensation cold against her fingers. She pushed open the heavy oak door to the private dining room. The moment of collision had arrived. What do you think is a more crushing emotional weight for Elena? The shame of her debt or the frustration of having her intellect ignored? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The private dining room was hushed. 2 men sat at the long table. One, Mr. Cole, was older and looked tired, buried in financial reports. The other, Julian Thorne, sat facing the door. He was exactly as advertised, sharp, severe, and radiating a profound impatience that Elena felt like a physical pressure against her skin. "Water, sir?" Elena's voice was quiet, professional. Julian didn't look up. He waved a dismissive hand, deep in conversation with Cole about a regulatory hurdle. "Just leave the pitcher." Elena ignored the instruction. If she left the pitcher, she'd have to come back, breaking the ghost rule. She moved with practiced, silent grace, approaching Mr. Cole first and filling his glass until the water kissed the rim. Then she moved to Julian. She held the heavy silver pitcher, tilting it slowly, concentrating on the stream of water entering the crystal glass. And then it happened. A piece of ice, clinging invisibly to the inside of the pitcher, dislodged and fell. It hit the side of the glass with a tiny singular clink, and the smallest possible splash escaped the rim. A microdroplet, a single insignificant sphere of water that landed on the dark, polished wood of the table, 2 inches from a stack of financial reports. Elena froze. The noise was microscopic, yet in the absolute silence of the room, it felt like a gunshot. Julian Thorne stopped talking mid-sentence. He didn't move fast. He moved slowly, deliberately turning his head. His dark, intense eyes didn't look at Elena. They looked at the single wet droplet on the table. He stared at it for 1 second. Then he lifted his gaze to her. It wasn't the rage of a man whose shirt had been soiled, or the irritation of a busy person. It was pure, cold, dismissive contempt. He looked at her as if she were a biological error. "Mr. Peterson," he boomed, the sound cutting through the silence and vibrating in Elena's chest. Elena's stomach turned to ice. She hadn't even spilled it on him. It was a single drop on the wood. The door flew open and Peterson scurried in, his face pale with panic. "Mr. Thorne, is everything all right?" "My apologies." "This server," Julian said, his voice dripping with icy disdain as he gestured to Elena with an immaculate cufflink, "is incompetent. I'm in the middle of a billion-dollar negotiation, and I have to be interrupted by this display of utter clumsiness." "Sir, I am so," Elena began, her voice already shaking slightly with the humiliation. "Quiet." Peterson hissed at her, his eyes wide with fear. He pulled a pristine white handkerchief from his breast pocket and personally dabbed at the single drop of water as if it were toxic waste. "I apologize, Mr. Thorne, profusely. It will not happen again. I will remove her from your service immediately." Julian leaned back in his chair, his gaze still locked on Elena. He looked at her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her pale face, her ridiculous apron. He turned slowly to Mr. Cole and let out a short, cynical huff of disbelief. And then he began to speak in a language he was certain no one in the entire restaurant, and certainly not the minimum wage help, would understand. He spoke in rapid, fluent Gulf-style Arabic, the specific dialect used in high finance in Riyadh. "Hada mahuwa ka fi hadihi al-bilad," he said, his voice laced with venom. "They let children do a professional's job. This place is a joke. Look at her. She's probably as empty-headed as she is clumsy. She can't even pour water. I'd be surprised if she can even read." He smirked at Cole, expecting a commiserating look. Cole, to his credit, just shifted uncomfortably. Thorne then added one final dismissive insult, the verbal equivalent of shooing a fly. "Just get her out of my sight." Peterson, hearing the foreign language, just smiled nervously, assuming it was important business talk. "Right away, sir. Sanchez, you're done here. Go to my office now." He turned to leave, expecting her to follow the standard procedure of humiliation and retreat. But Elena didn't move. Something inside Elena Sanchez snapped. It wasn't just the insult. It was the specific, precise dialect he used, the one she had spent 5 years of her life and $100,000 to master. She had written a 200-page thesis on the sociolinguistic evolution of those very Gulf dialects. Being called empty-headed and unable to read, in the private language she dedicated her life to, was not an insult. It was a cosmic mockery. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp, and terrifying clarity. She did not speak to Peterson. She spoke directly to Julian Thorne, who had already begun to turn back to his documents, having dismissed her from his reality. She said in perfect, unaccented, academic-grade Arabic, "Ya Sayyidi, I tikadak gare." The entire room froze. Peterson stopped, his hand on the doorknob, mid-turn. Mr. Cole's head snapped up, his jaw slack. Julian Thorne's hand, which was reaching for his pen, stopped dead. He didn't turn around, but his entire body was instantly rigid, like a statue carved of ice. Elena continued, her voice not loud, but carrying the precise, cutting authority of a professor addressing a disruptive, ill-informed student. She used the same Gulf dialect he had chosen to ensure every single nuance was understood. "I am not empty-headed," she stated in flawless Arabic. "And I can, in fact, read. I can read the financial reports on your table. I can read the poetry of Almudden Abbey, and I can most certainly read your character, which you've just laid bare for everyone to see." Julian Thorne turned his head. He moved slowly as if submerged in deep water. His face was utterly drained of color. The arrogance, the impatience, the sheer power he radiated, it all evaporated, replaced by a look of profound, unadulterated, disbelieving shock. He stared at her as if she had just grown a second head. Peterson, hearing the stream of what was to him gibberish, spun around, aghast. "Sanchez, what in God's name do you think you're doing? I told you to get out." Elena held Julian Thorne's gaze, ignoring her manager completely. "Furthermore," she continued, her accent flawless, her tone biting, "my competence is not defined by a single drop of water, just as a man's character should not be defined by the money in his bank. But you, sir, are making that a very difficult argument to support." Mr. Cole let out a small, strangled cough. Julian Thorne simply stared, speechless, the billionaire who controlled worlds reduced to a tableau of horror. This waitress, this nothing, had not only understood his private insult, she had replied, corrected him, and lectured him, in a dialect that his own multi-million-dollar tutors struggled to perfect. "What is going on?" Peterson shrieked, his face turning a blotchy red. Are you threatening this customer, Sanchez?" Elena finally broke her gaze from Thorne and looked at her manager. She switched back to English, her voice calm and terrifyingly clear. "Mr. Peterson, this gentleman insulted me. He called me an empty-headed child and said I was clumsy and couldn't read. He did so in Arabic, assuming I was too stupid to understand him." Peterson looked frantically between Elena and Julian Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, I'm sure she's mistaken. She's hysterical." "She is not mistaken." The voice was Julian Thorne's. It was quiet, strained, and still pale. He looked at Elena, and for the first time he wasn't looking at her. He was seeing her. The shock was slowly being replaced by a dawning, terrifying, professional calculation. "She understood every word," Thorne said in English, his voice flat. Peterson's entire world seemed to crumble. He pointed a shaking finger at Elena. You speak that? You're fired. Insubordination. Eavesdropping. Get out. Get out of this restaurant now." Elena looked at Peterson, then back at Thorne. Julian was just watching her, his expression unreadable, a battle of arrogance and professional necessity raging behind his dark eyes. He didn't defend her. He didn't stop the manager. Of course, Elena thought bitterly. What did I expect? He was a billionaire and she was the help who had just embarrassed him. "Fine," Elena said. She untied the black apron, the symbolic weight of her debt and her failure, folded it neatly and placed it on the service tray. "I'll send you a forwarding address for my last paycheck," she said to Peterson. She then looked directly at Julian Thorne. "Have a lovely evening, Mr. Thorne." Then she leaned in just slightly and whispered in flawless Arabic, the same language he had used to condemn her, "Wabai tafik mai afkatak. Satachuhu. And good luck with your deal. You're going to need it." She turned and walked out of the room, closing the heavy oak door gently behind her, leaving Julian Thorne and his associate in the profound wreckage of the silence she had created. Elena gave up her job for a single moment of righteous victory. Was her defiance worth the risk of losing everything, or was it a necessary act of self-validation? Let me know what you think in the comments. Elena walked out of the Meridian into the cold, indifferent embrace of the Chicago night. She didn't feel triumphant. The adrenaline that had fueled her incredible moment of intellectual revenge drained away, leaving behind a cold, nauseating panic. She was fired. Her tiny garden-level apartment, where she could see the feet of strangers walking past her window, felt utterly suffocating. She sat on her second-hand sofa, the triumph of her pride instantly outweighed by the crushing weight of reality. Her rent was due in a week. Her student loan payment, a staggering $800 that felt more like a fine for daring to dream big, was due in 2. She had $412 in her savings account. Her moment of defiance, which had felt so righteous and necessary in the dining room, now felt stupid, reckless, and luxurious. What did I accomplish? She thought, burying her face in her hands. I talked back to a billionaire in his secret language and now I'm bankrupt. She allowed herself to cry, a hot, bitter tide that she hadn't given into since she first realized her academic pedigree was worthless in the face of her financial reality. It wasn't just the job loss, it was the sheer, crushing irony of her life. All that work, all that mastery, only to be dragged back to zero by a single drop of water and a 5-second burst of pride. Elena resisted the memory of Julian Thorne's shocked face. She resisted the intoxicating feeling of power she'd felt while lecturing him. She tried to convince herself that the victory had been shallow, temporary. She told herself she was an idiot for letting her intellectual vanity derail her only source of income. She was a flawed, relatable character, stubbornly clinging to the belief that she'd made a catastrophic error, unable to accept the true validation of her skills. Her emotional progression was a rapid slide from catharsis to despair. She spent the rest of the night furiously researching online job boards, desperately trying to find a new high-end restaurant job, anything to maintain the illusion of control over her failing life. 42 stories up, in the immense silence of the private dining room, Julian Thorne was not contemplating Elena Sanchez's humiliation. He was contemplating her utility. The shock had worn off quickly, replaced by a deep, unsettling combination of professional intrigue and private fury at his own lapse in judgment. He hadn't just insulted a low-wage worker. He had insulted a linguistic master in the one language that mattered most to his immediate, multi-billion-dollar interests. "Did you hear the dialect, Cole?" Julian asked, his voice low and dangerous as Peterson, after being dismissed with a sharp, terrifying glare, scurried out. Mr. Cole, who was still rubbing his neck, whispered, "Flawless, Julian. Perfectly regional. Gulf standard. I've never heard anyone outside of the kingdom speak it that well, much less that context." Julian ignored the context. "Her thesis," he muttered, picking up his phone. "Georgetown. Masters. Linguistics." He quickly pulled up the university's alumni records and cross-referenced her name. The sheer emotional stakes of his deal suddenly hinged on this ridiculous coincidence. He resisted the truth, that he had behaved like an arrogant fool. He resisted acknowledging her as a person. Instead, he forced himself to see her only as a new, necessary variable. She wasn't just fluent, she understood the subtext of his insult, which meant she could understand the subtext of the Saudi delegation. Julian's $2 billion deal was vulnerable. His previous lead translator, Mr. Henderson, who understood the necessary cultural nuances, had indeed been poached by a competitor 2 days ago, a fact that had been putting immense internal pressure on Julian. The translation service he'd been using since then was relying on formal, textbook Arabic, missing all the vital idiomatic expressions and colloquialisms that make up true negotiation. They were talking at the Saudis, not with them. Julian looked at the documents. He had a massive problem. And the only person who had demonstrated the requisite genius to fix it was the woman he had just publicly humiliated and had fired. He leaned back, the chilling calculation settling over his features. The arrogance was still there, but it was now tempered by a pragmatic ruthlessness. He couldn't just hire her. He needed to absorb her completely. He needed to turn her defiance into devotion. He looked at Cole. "Find her. No. I don't care if you have to call Georgetown, the police, or the manager of this idiotic restaurant. Get her in my office tomorrow afternoon. And Cole," he paused, the subtext and silence heavy in the air. "Tell her she is not being sued. Tell her this is an offer." He knew he couldn't simply let her walk away. He needed her mind, her education, and her inexplicable, furious genius. He was about to turn a moment of personal vengeance into the biggest transaction of her life, betting that the weight of her emotional stakes, her debt, would always outweigh her pride. Julian's assistant, Amanda Bishop, was woken at 3 a.m. and put on the task. By 3 p.m. the following afternoon, Elena Sanchez had received 6 automated rejection emails for the service jobs she'd applied to. Her phone, which had been silent all day, finally buzzed. It was an unknown number, immediately followed by a professional, crisp voicemail. The cold voice of Amanda Bishop, executive assistant to Mr. Julian Thorne, requested a meeting immediately. A car was being sent to Elena's address in 15 minutes. Elena stood up, her body shaking. Terror warred with a strange flicker of vindication. He wasn't ignoring her. He was calling her. She splashed cold water on her puffy face, changed into her one-interview outfit, and descended the basement steps of her apartment building. Exactly 15 minutes later, a gleaming black Mercedes S-Class glided silently to the curb, insulated from the world. She had no idea if she was being driven to her sentencing or her salvation. The black Mercedes S-Class, silent and insulated, ascended 42 floors without a single stop. When the doors of the private elevator chimed softly, Elena was deposited directly into the immense, glass-walled penthouse office of Thorn Global. The office was vast, a cathedral of modern commerce. 3 walls were glass, offering a staggering view of the cityscape that had felt so alien and hostile the night before. At a massive black desk, standing with his back to the room looking out at his domain, was Julian Thorn. He was in his shirt sleeves, his suit jacket gone, looking less like a CEO and more like a predator examining his territory. "Miss Bishop, you can go. Hold all my calls," he said, not turning around. The assistant vanished through a side door. The elevator doors slid shut behind Elena. Silence. Deafening, expensive silence. Finally, Julian turned. His expression was no longer one of contempt, but of fierce, concentrated calculation. The raw shock was gone, replaced by a consuming professional interest. He looked at her not as a waiter, but as a complex machine he needed to understand. "You have a master's in linguistics," he stated, his voice flat. "Yes," Elena replied, her voice small but steady. "From Georgetown." He nodded slowly. "My alma mater. My father sits on the board." Elena's heart sank. This was it, the old boys' network. He was going to have her blacklisted. "He never mentioned the linguistics department," Julian continued, walking slowly toward her. "He considered it a soft science. A waste of tuition." He stopped a few feet away. "Last night you spoke in a Gulf dialect. Your accent was flawless. Better than my own. I pay my tutors $500 an hour, and they don't sound as good as you." "I spent a year in Riyadh for my thesis," Elena said, finding her footing. "I lived it. I breathed it." You lived in Riyadh and you were serving me scallops," he said, the disconnect baffling him. "Student loans, Mr. Thorn. They don't pay themselves." He stared at her for a long moment, then his tone shifted back to business, sharp and intense. "Last night I was an arrogant fool. What I said was inexcusable. It was the result of a very high-stress negotiation, but that is no excuse. I am sorry." The apology hung in the air, cold, formal, and shocking. "Thank you," Elena said quietly. "But I didn't bring you here to apologize," he said. "I brought you here because I have a problem." He gestured to his desk, where the same financial documents from the restaurant were spread out. "This is a $2 billion deal, a green energy project. My partners are a consortium based in Riyadh. The deal is falling apart. We're arguing over contractual nuances, but the reality is we're talking past each other." He locked his eyes on hers. "My lead translator quit. I've been using a third-party service and it's a disaster. You didn't just understand what I said last night. You understood the subtext, the insult, the nuance. You proved you are a master of intent." He walked back to his desk and picked up a sheet of paper. "I called the Meridian this morning. I informed Mr. Peterson that his behavior was appalling and that you were the most professional person in that room. If he ever wanted anyone from my network to set foot in his establishment again, he would issue you a formal apology and offer you your job back with a promotion to manager." Elena blinked. He agreed?" "Of course," Thorn said dismissively. "You can have your old job back, Miss Sanchez. You can go back to pouring water for men like me." He slid the piece of paper across the desk. It was a cashier's check. "Or," he said, "you can accept this." Elena stared. The paper was made out to Elena Sanchez. The amount was $1 million. She had never seen so many zeros gathered in one place. "1 million?" she stammered. "That's your signing bonus," Thorn said, his impatience resurfacing. "Your salary for the project will be triple that. The project is estimated to last 3 months. If we fail, you keep the bonus. If we succeed, you get a significant completion fee. I am hiring you to translate intent, Miss Sanchez. Not words." The sheer emotional stake of the offer was dizzying. That check would erase her $100,000 debt instantly, lift the crushing weight she'd carried for years, and change her family's life. "You insulted me. You got me fired. And now you're offering me a fortune," Elena said, her voice shaking but hardening with clarity. "The universe has a twisted sense of humor," Thorn conceded. "I am offering you a fortune to fix a problem I am having with the very language I used to demean you. I'm desperate and you are uniquely qualified." The shock was fading, replaced by the same cold focus she'd felt in the restaurant. He was desperate and smart. He needed a weapon and her education was it. "What are the terms?" she asked, her voice instantly businesslike. Thorn almost smiled. "Simple. You are on retainer 24/7. You will be my personal advisor and sole translator for this negotiation. You will fly with me to Riyadh tomorrow. Tomorrow? The negotiations are in person. You'll have an office here, an expense account, a new wardrobe. Miss Bishop will handle everything. All you have to do is what you did last night. Listen to what they're really saying. Elena looked from the check to his face. This was validation. This was the chance to use her skill, to be in the room where decisions were made, not serving the drinks. I have one condition, Elena said. Thorne raised an eyebrow, a flash of irritation crossing his face. No one gave him conditions. I am not your assistant. I am not your servant, she stated firmly. I am your linguistic and cultural advisor. You will treat me as a professional. When I am in that room, my word on language and culture is final. If I tell you not to say something, you don't say it. If I tell you that you've misunderstood, you listen. I am not an employee, Mr. Thorne. I am a consultant. The shadow of a genuine smile touched Julian's lips, the first true non-cynical expression Elena had seen. He recognized authority when he heard it. Miss Sanchez, he said, for $4 million you can call yourself whatever you want, as long as you save this deal. Is that clear? Crystal, Elena said, matching his intensity. The next 24 hours were a blur of sensory details and hyper-efficient logistics. Elena cashed the check, watching the teller's hands shake. She was rushed to a high-end tailor, measured for bespoke suits in powerful, muted colors. She was given a new phone, a secure laptop, and a temporary corporate apartment larger than her entire previous building. She didn't sleep. She spent the night poring over the documents, instantly seeing the problem. The translation service Thorne had used relied on formal classical Arabic. The consortium's internal communications, however, were peppered with a specific regional Nadi dialect. The previous translators missed critical colloquialisms. They translated, "We must wait for the wind to settle," as poetic musing. Elena knew it was a common business idiom meaning, "We are waiting for the regulatory committee to give the unofficial go-ahead." Thorne's team, replying with sterile legalistic English, appeared blunt, untrusting, and profoundly insulting. At 5 a.m., she met Julian Thorne and Mr. Cole at a private airfield. Thorne was back in his suit armor, grim but focused. "Miss Sanchez, you look different," he noted. She was wearing a perfectly fitted navy suit, her hair sleek. The waitress was gone. "So do you, Mr. Thorne," she replied. They boarded the Gulfstream G650. As the jet climbed over the dark Chicago skyline, beginning their forced proximity across an ocean, Elena opened her laptop. "We need to talk," she said. "We are not going to win this by arguing contract points. We are going to win this by offering an apology." Julian and Cole stared at her, their pacing of the conversation slowed by shock. "An apology?" Thorne balked. "For what?" "For our arrogance," Elena said, her voice firm. "We've been translating their courtesy as weakness and our directness as strength. We've been shouting at them in a language they understand all too well. We are going to start this meeting by me apologizing on your behalf for the cultural ignorance of our previous team. We are going to show humility, and then we are going to fix this." Julian stared at the woman who had served him water 48 hours ago. He was about to argue, but he saw the same look she'd given him in the restaurant, a look of absolute, unshakable professional certainty. He trusted the genius that had humiliated him. He nodded. "Do it." The Gulfstream G650 sliced silently through the night sky, its cabin a stark contrast of luxury and intense professional pressure. Elena sat across from Julian Thorne at a small conference table. Mr. Cole had wisely retreated to the rear cabin, leaving the two protagonists in a state of forced proximity. Elena had her new laptop open, displaying the side-by-side comparisons of the miscommunication. Julian watched her, his expression a mix of awe and proprietary frustration. "The deal isn't failing because of the numbers, Mr. Thorne," Elena began, running a hand through her hair, which was no longer in a tight bun, but elegantly styled. "It's failing because of pride. Yours and what they perceive as yours." "Explain," he commanded, his voice sharp. "This is your previous translation service's work." She pointed to an email. The Saudi side stated, "We must wait for the wind to settle before we plant the seed." Your team replied with a legalistic demand for firm, binding timelines. To them you didn't just reply, you mocked them. Julian scowled. "It sounds like poetic nonsense." "It's not," Elena countered. "It's a common business idiom used in the Nadi region, where the consortium is based. It means, we are waiting for the unofficial green light from the regulatory committee, and rushing us will only make the committee say no." By replying with rigid, sterile legal terms, your team translated their courtesy as weakness. You made your side appear blunt, untrusting, and fundamentally ignorant of their culture. You have insulted them without ever knowing it. She looked at him. They don't need a translator, Mr. Thorne. They need a cultural interpreter. Someone who understands the difference between the word and the intent. Julian leaned back, a rare moment of genuine self-reflection crossing his face. A master's degree, Miss Sanchez. You dedicated years to this only to carry plates for me. And you dedicated years to building this empire, only to be blind to the people who actually run it. Elena shot back gently, letting the subtext and silence speak volumes. The silence that followed was different from the one in the restaurant. This one was fertile, shared ground. My father never understood it either, Julian murmured, looking past her, out the window at the black expanse of the sky. He was not talking about the deal anymore. Understood what? Elena asked softly. Soft sciences. Anything that wasn't a transaction, Julian said. He spoke, not with his usual harsh arrogance, but with the quiet weariness of a man recounting a long, cold education. My upbringing was entirely transactional. Emotion was inefficient. Weakness. My father didn't raise me, he managed me. I was a future asset to be molded. He stopped, realizing he had revealed too much. But the admission hung there, the core reason for his cynicism and his tendency to see people only by their utility. Elena watched him, suddenly seeing the suit not as armor of power, but as the prison of expectation. She saw a profound loneliness that mirrored her own, albeit in a different currency. My debt, Mr. Thorne, is my father's expectation, Elena confessed, lowering her voice. He was an academic. He saw my master's as the bare minimum. When I couldn't get a job that matched my credentials, he refused to help, saying I needed to learn the value of investment. He was punishing me for what he saw as my failure to monetize my potential. He forced you into this? Julian asked, his dark eyes now focused entirely on her. He thought shame would be a better motivator than kindness, Elena said simply, touching the edge of her laptop, a gesture that showed, not told, her past pain. It turns out the shame motivated me straight into your restaurant, wearing a name tag. They had found a terrifying patch of common ground. They were both people defined by their parents' cold, transactional expectations, burdened by the high cost of their own potential. Julian, suddenly uncomfortable with the intimacy, pulled back. So, the apology. Will that be enough to fix my father's mistakes and mine? The apology is to open the door, Elena said, her voice instantly professional again, but laced with new meaning. The fix is in the language. We must speak to their heart, not just their legal team. We need to honor their regional terms. We need to be humble. She looked at the documents. We have to be more than just smart, Mr. Thorne. We have to be respectful. Julian looked at her, truly seeing the woman who, burdened by debt and her own shame, was still teaching him a lesson about life that his millions had never bought him. He realized that the woman he had dismissed as a clumsy child might be the only person who had ever truly understood his life's core problem. I honor our agreement, Julian said, a shift in his tone. Your word is final. Let's go to Riyadh and be humble. The connection between them was now fragile but real, built not on attraction, but on the shared universal theme of being severely misunderstood and carrying the heavy burden of cold, parental expectation. Elena and Julian both suffer from the transactional expectations of their fathers. Do you think this shared vulnerability will be strong enough to withstand the pressure of a $2 billion negotiation? Share your predictions in the comments. The boardroom in Riyadh was an exercise in opulent, intimidating power. A single slab of polished mahogany stretched 30 feet, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a cityscape of sand and glass. On the Saudi side sat Sheikh Al-Jamil, the formidable patriarch of the consortium, in immaculate white robes, along with his 3 sons and their legal team. At the end of their table sat Mr. Ibrahim, their lead translator, a man known for his academic brilliance and professional ruthlessness. The mood was ice cold. The sheikh, a man who had not smiled, spoke first in measured English. Mr. Thorne, we are displeased. Your contracts are aggressive. Your timelines are disrespectful. We feel you do not understand the way we do business. Julian tensed, ready to launch into a retort, but Elena, sitting next to him, placed a hand gently on the portfolio in front of him, the prearranged nonverbal stop signal. She leaned forward and addressed the sheikh. She began in perfect, formal Arabic, her voice calm and carrying, instantly commanding attention. Ya Samu al-Sheikh al-Jamil, hal yamkinuni an astadin li al-kalam? Your Excellency Sheikh al-Jamil, may I be permitted to speak? The sheikh and his sons registered a visible flicker of surprise. Ibrahim, their translator, narrowed his eyes, recognizing the caliber of her speech. "You may," the sheik said, curious. "My name is Elena Sanchez," she continued, maintaining the formal register. "I am Mr. Thorne's senior cultural and linguistic advisor. I have only just been brought onto this project, and I must begin on behalf of Thorne Global with an apology." The temperature in the room shifted. The tension did not disappear, but it moved. "We have been reviewing the correspondence," Elena continued in Arabic, her tone humble but firm. "And it is clear to us that our previous representation did not afford you the respect you are due. They mistook your careful, deliberate planning for hesitation. They failed to understand the nuances of your regional expressions, and in doing so, they replied with a bluntness that I am sure was perceived as arrogance. That was our failure, not yours, and we are here to correct it." The sheik stared at her. He had expected arrogance, legal threats, or excuses, not humility delivered in his own tongue. "Mr. Thorne, this woman speaks for you?" the sheik asked, his voice deep. Julian, following Elena's script, nodded firmly. "She does. On all matters of culture and language, Miss Sanchez's voice is my voice." This was the first true moment of emotional bonding. Julian was implicitly submitting his own powerful ego and his multi-billion-dollar deal to the authority of the woman he had insulted 2 days prior. For the next 2 hours, Elena was a masterclass in show, don't tell. She was a conductor, a diplomat, and a dictionary all in one. When Julian's lawyer stated, "We need a firm deadline on the regulatory approval," Elena didn't translate the words. She translated the intent. "Mr. Thorne deeply respects the necessity of the regulatory process and wishes to know how we can best support your timeline to ensure a smooth and swift approval for our mutual benefit." She was constantly diffusing potential bombs. At one point, when the sheik's son made a strong, idiomatic statement in Arabic, Ibrahim, the other translator, translated it stiffly into English. "This is not possible." Elena politely interjected, but with quiet, absolute certainty. "If I may, Mr. Ibrahim, I believe the sheik's son's intent was not just that it is impossible, but that the pacing of the request feels pressured, which is a matter of respect, not capability. Is that correct, Your Excellency?" The son, shocked that a Westerner had caught the subtlety, nodded emphatically. "Naam bilab." "Yes, exactly." Julian watched her work. The calculation in his eyes was slowly dissolving, replaced by genuine, rapt admiration. He was witnessing her true value, which extended far beyond the transactional price tag he'd placed on her. Then came the sticking point, a difficult liability clause. The argument grew heated, and the consortium demanded that Thorne Global assume all risk for any regulatory delays. Julian's lawyers refused. Finally, the sheik held up a hand. He spoke to his sons and his translator, Mr. Ibrahim, in rapid-fire, private Arabic. They were having a heated debate. "Hada in," the sheik said sharply in Arabic. "This is an insult. Why should we trust them?" Mr. Ibrahim, the translator, then offered a quiet, fast suggestion to the sheik. "Yasamu al-Sheikh Rubama Taswiya. Yumkinuna al-Muwafaka. Allah sharihim walakin faka ida wafaku. Allah istikdam yukawilna al-mal al-mufalikul al-amaliya." Your Excellency, perhaps a compromise. We can agree to their clause, but only if they agree to use our preferred local subcontractor for all labor. The sheik pondered this, then nodded. "Asanan. Iktari Dalik." "Fine. Propose it." Mr. Ibrahim turned to the Thorne team. His face was a mask of professional calm. "Gentlemen, Miss Sanchez, the sheik is willing to make a concession. He will agree to your liability clause. On one small condition. As a show of goodwill, he requests that you prioritize hiring local labor as opportunities allow. A symbolic gesture. Julian's lawyers brightened. "That's it? A symbolic gesture? We can absolutely put that in a memorandum. It's not even a contractual change." Julian looked at Elena. She was staring not at Ibrahim but down at her notepad. Her face was pale, a tiny tremor in her lower lip. Her calm had evaporated. "Miss Sanchez?" Julian asked, quietly, knowing instinctively that something was terribly wrong. "Is that acceptable?" Elena took a deep, steadying breath. This was the moment of absolute peril, and the moment of absolute trust. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice low and steady, "may I have a word with you and Mr. Cole in private?" "1 minute. It is urgent." The request was a profound breach of protocol. The Saudi team looked annoyed. Ibrahim looked nervous. Julian, honoring his promise, stood up instantly. 5 minutes, gentlemen. Please excuse us." They stepped into the private anteroom. The second the door closed, Julian grabbed her arm, his face etched with immediate, unreserved trust and concern. "What is it, Elena?" "That was great news. We won." "We're being cheated," Elena said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "That translator, Ibrahim. He's lying." "What?" Cole gasped. "He didn't translate what the sheik said," Elena explained rapidly. "He inserted his own agenda. He proposed a compromise to the sheik, use their preferred local subcontractor, singular. But when he translated it for us, he changed it to prioritize hiring local labor, which is meaningless goodwill." Julian's eyes turned to dark ice. "Why?" "A preferred subcontractor isn't a symbolic gesture, Mr. Thorne," Elena said. "It's a multi-million-dollar kickback. He's trying to slip it past us and likely past the sheik. He's sabotaging the deal for his own profit. He's betting that I'm just a standard translator who wouldn't catch the difference between the specific regional term for subcontractor and the general term for labor." Julian was silent for a beat. The level of deception was staggering. He had been seconds away from nodding his assent. "He's betting," Julian said, his voice dangerously low, "that you're just like the last ones. That you're just a servant." He looked at Elena. The trust in his eyes was absolute and overwhelming. "What do we do, Miss Sanchez? This is your room." The ultimate emotional bond was forged. Julian Thorne, the cynical billionaire, was submitting his entire professional reality to the judgment and genius of the woman he had called an empty-headed child. Julian is about to face a multi-million-dollar double-cross, exposed only by Elena's linguistic mastery. What clever, non-aggressive linguistic trap do you think Elena should use to expose the fraudulent translator without insulting the sheik? Share your ideas below. Julian and Cole followed Elena back into the Riyadh boardroom, the tension so thick it was palpable. Julian, armed with Elena's strategic advice, was grimly focused. Elena did not directly accuse Mr. Ibrahim. Instead, she took her place and addressed the Sheikh al-Jamil in the purest Nadi dialect, her tone one of deep cultural deference. "Your Excellency," Elena began, her voice soft but resonating with authority, "I must return to the matter of the compromise. Mr. Thorne is committed to maximizing local employment. However, to ensure maximum transparency for our board, we require a small clarification on the proposed partnership." She looked directly at Ibrahim, whose face was unnaturally still. "You stated, Mr. Ibrahim, that the agreement requires us to utilize the preferred local subcontractor, a specific regional Nadi term for supplier/partner, for all labor. Given the size of this project, Mr. Thorne must ensure we comply fully with this condition." She then turned to the sheik. "Your Excellency, may Mr. Thorne request that, to avoid any confusion or ambiguity, we include the name of this preferred local subcontractor directly in the addendum, so that we may immediately begin due diligence and partnership discussions? This will expedite the entire process and demonstrate our commitment to your choice." A profound silence descended. The sheik looked immediately at Ibrahim, whose mask of calm finally cracked. The demand for the name was a linguistic checkmate. If Ibrahim provided a name, it would confirm a specific, non-symbolic contractual obligation and expose him as the intermediary for the kickback. If he refused, he would appear to be blocking progress and transparency. The sheik, already wary from the miscommunications, watched Ibrahim intently. Ibrahim stammered, switching to formal English, trying to maintain control. "Your Excellency, Miss Sanchez is mistaken. It is merely a call for local talent, a gesture of goodwill. The specific name is not necessary for the contract." Elena smiled, a slow, professional smile. She switched to English, addressing Julian and Cole, while ensuring the sheik understood every word. "Mr. Thorne, our original goal was to prioritize local labor, which is indeed a symbolic gesture. However, the exact Arabic term Mr. Ibrahim used with the sheik prior to his translation clearly implies a specific contractual partner. Which is it, Mr. Ibrahim? Is this a symbolic gesture, or is this a binding contract naming a partner?" The sheik, realizing he was being manipulated, brought his hand down hard on the table. He did not need to understand English. He understood the dialectic discrepancy and the implied dishonesty. He spoke not to Ibrahim but to Julian. "Mr. Thorne, dismiss your translator. And let this woman speak for you." The deal was saved. Ibrahim was swiftly and silently escorted out by the sheik's security, the $2 billion infrastructure project now back on track, built on the foundation of Elena's cultural genius. 2 hours later, after the main clauses were agreed upon and the necessary addenda drawn up, Julian, Elena, and Cole were back on the jet, soaring over the Arabian desert toward a different deal in Zurich. Julian was euphoric, the $2 billion success intoxicating. He poured 2 glasses of the finest champagne and handed one to Elena. "To the best cultural advisor money can buy," he said, his eyes glittering with triumph. Elena accepted the toast but set the glass down. She watched him. His intensity was breathtaking, but in his elation, the old armor was returning, thicker than before. He saw the world as a game he had just won, and she was the winning move. "Elena," Julian said, leaning forward, the formality of Miss Sanchez gone, replaced by a possessive intimacy. "You are a genius. You are my secret weapon. You saved this deal and likely the next 10. I'm canceling the 3-month contract. I want you on full-time staff immediately. We'll draft a new contract when we land. We're talking 5 years, guaranteed compensation that starts at $10 million a year, and a seat on the executive advisory board. Anything you want, you name it." He was offering her a fortress of wealth, absolute financial security for the rest of her life. But his words, secret weapon, compensation, full-time staff, landed on her like stones. He hadn't praised her integrity, her emotional intelligence, or her insight. He had appraised her. He was paying her a spectacular amount to return to the role of an asset, albeit a highly valued one. "I'm not taking it," Elena said quietly. Julian frowned, the victory smile freezing on his face. "Excuse me? The 5-year contract. I'm not signing it," she repeated. "Is this about the money?" Julian scoffed, irritation flashing. "Name your price. $15 million? Ownership shares." "It's not about the money, Julian," Elena said, using his first name with sharp clarity. "You've given me enough money to erase my debt and start a company of my own. That's all the payment I need. This isn't payment. This is a partnership. We're a team." Julian argued, but his voice was already laced with the familiar transactional arrogance. "No. We were a team for 2 days," Elena corrected, the emotional stakes of this moment far exceeding the negotiation they just won. "You needed a translator of intent and I delivered. But you just called me a secret weapon. You still see me as a tool to be stored in your arsenal, to be deployed when needed. You don't see me as a person, Julian. You see me as a 5-year, $10 million insurance policy." The air thinned. The bond seemed destroyed. Julian's face hardened, the look that had melted away in the boardroom returning, cold, defensive, and furious. "I am offering you a life that 99% of the world dreams of. Is this about pride? Are you going to sacrifice this opportunity for some ridiculous notion of independence, just like you sacrificed your waitressing job?" "My pride," Elena said, her voice shaking with controlled fury, "is what allows me to sit across from you now as an equal, not as your property. I risked financial ruin for the integrity of my mind 2 days ago. I'm not going to trade that integrity for a gilded cage today. You proved you value my skill. Now I need to prove that I value my freedom." She pushed the unused champagne glass back across the table. "I don't want your contract, Julian. I want my autonomy." Julian stared at her, utterly bewildered, unable to categorize a person who refused that amount of money. The one thing he couldn't buy, he couldn't control. "Fine," he said, his voice flat and dangerously cold. "Take your check. Take your millions. And you can get off this plane in Zurich and start your life of autonomous poverty. I'll send a car to the airport for you." Elena nodded, her eyes bright with tears she refused to shed. She had won the battle for the deal but lost the fight for his humanity, and lost the promise of the fledgling connection they had shared. She knew she had made the right choice for her dignity, but the emotional cost was crushing. This was the lowest emotional point of the story. Julian Thorne returned to Chicago alone. He didn't speak to Cole on the flight. He stared out the window of the Gulf Stream, the success of the $2 billion deal now feeling strangely hollow. Elena had gotten off the plane in Zurich, accepting the car he sent, but refusing any further contact. She was physically free and he was professionally triumphant, but he had never felt so utterly empty. He sat in his penthouse office, the expansive view mocking his isolation. He realized his flaw was not arrogance, but fear of genuine vulnerability. He didn't call her a weapon to demean her. He called her a weapon because it was the highest form of professional praise he knew how to give. In his world, a weapon was the ultimate necessary defense. By rejecting the contract, she hadn't rejected his money, she had rejected his entire worldview. He finally called Cole. Did she take any of the other corporate gifts? The new phone? The laptop? She left the phone and laptop with the driver, Julian. Just the check, Cole confirmed softly, sensing the devastation in his boss's voice. She told the driver to confirm her consulting company would be in touch regarding future linguistic services. She's starting her own firm. Julian rubbed his eyes. He realized the full magnitude of his mistake. He had tried to purchase her soul, and in doing so he had proven her point, that he could only value things he owned. He had reduced a magnificent human connection to an equation. He was alone, wealthy, and successful, and he had never felt more like the cold, transactional asset his father had raised. He finally confronted his emotional flaw, his inability to express respect or affection outside the confines of a dollar amount. He sat for hours, reviewing the negotiation notes, not for business, but for her handwriting, her precise cultural insights. He needed to reach out, but he knew any attempt to call, email, or send another contract would only reinforce her accusation. The next move could not be transactional. He thought back to the insult she had thrown in his face at the Meridian. I can read the poetry of Al-Mutanabbi. Al-Mutanabbi, the great 10th century Arabic poet, whose works were filled with themes of pride, destiny, and the search for profound truth. Julian left his office. He went to a small, independent antique book dealer on a quiet side street, the kind of place he would have previously considered a waste of time. He spent 2 hours finding the perfect, original cloth-bound copy of Al-Mutanabbi's collected works. He had it delivered not by a corporate assistant, but by a discreet, anonymous courier, to Elena's old apartment address, just in case her mailing address hadn't changed. The only note inside was written in his own elegant hand in Arabic, Wa kol liladi kana, Allah azam, inni arif man ant. And say to the one who stood firm, I know who you are. Elena was back in Chicago. She had processed the $1 million check, paid off her entire student loan debt, and had the remaining money in an interest-bearing account. She was financially free. She had rented a small, professional office downtown and was officially establishing Sanchez Linguistic Consulting. She should have been ecstatic, but the triumph felt muted. She kept thinking about Julian, not the arrogant billionaire, but the tired man on the jet who spoke of his father's cold management. She had taught him a lesson, but in doing so, she had thrown away the one thing she hadn't expected to gain, a challenging intellectual partner and the beginnings of a deep, unexpected connection. She resisted calling him, clinging to her pride. She knew he wouldn't reach out. He would be too proud to admit he needed her outside of a contract. She had demanded he see her as a person, but by leaving, she had also demanded he be vulnerable first. Her phone buzzed. It was a confirmation from the courier. A package had been delivered to her old garden apartment address, the one she was still technically renting for 2 more weeks. She drove back to the familiar, worn building, her heart pounding. The package was simple, wrapped in brown paper, bearing no return address or company logo. Inside was the book, Al-Mutanabbi. She opened the heavy cover and saw the inscription. Julian's fluid, educated Arabic script. Wa kol liladi kana, Allah azam, inni arif man ant. Elena's hand trembled. The literal translation, I know who you are, was simple, but the subtext was monumental. It was not a contract. It was not a job offer. It was a direct, vulnerable acknowledgement of her integrity, her strength, the one who stood firm, and her intellectual identity. It was an apology delivered on her own terms, in the language of poetry, not finance. It was his way of saying, I see the person, not the weapon. The choice was clear. She could cling to her hard-won independence and walk away, successful but alone, or she could choose vulnerability. She could accept that he had found a non-transactional way to apologize and risk her pride for the promise of love at last. She looked up the quote's context. It was from a poem about recognizing greatness and destiny. Elena closed the book, the tremor in her hands subsiding, replaced by the same cold, sharp clarity she'd felt at the Meridian. She knew exactly what her reply must be. It would not be a phone call, and it would not be a contract. It would be a location. A neutral meeting place. A bridge built not of millions but of mutual, hard-won respect. She sent a single text message to the private phone Julian had given her on the jet, a number he would assume was dead. Location, the Art Institute Garden Courtyard. Tomorrow 11 a.m. She waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. Finally, a single reply. JT, I'll be there. Julian's gesture of sending the poetry was non-transactional and vulnerable, a major step for his character. What single, decisive action do you think Elena should take when she meets him to prove she has chosen connection over pride? Let me know in the comments. The Art Institute Garden Courtyard, a quiet space sequestered from the bustling city, was a deliberate choice. It was public enough to be neutral, yet beautiful enough to symbolize creation and new beginnings. Elena arrived exactly at 11 a.m. She wasn't wearing her bespoke navy suit. She wore a simple, professional blouse and slacks, projecting capability without corporate armor. She found Julian standing by a stone fountain, dressed impeccably but without his usual stiff formality. He looked exhausted, yet utterly focused, the same intense look he'd worn when they discussed the $2 billion deal. He turned as she approached. Neither spoke. The tension was acute, but unlike the clash at the Meridian, this tension was entirely emotional, not social or financial. Julian finally broke the silence, his voice low. "You came. You sent poetry, not a contract," Elena replied, holding his gaze. "That's a distinction I had to acknowledge." "The contract was an insult," Julian conceded, his confession a major step for his character. "I offered you my highest expression of value, but I failed to use your language. I failed to see that your value is not stored in a bank, but in your mind and your integrity. I apologize, Elena. Truly." He was no longer the arrogant billionaire. He was a man asking for genuine connection. Elena nodded, accepting the sincerity of the words. But she knew the final resolution had to happen in the language that had first broken them apart, and then bound them together. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, carefully transcribed note. She looked him directly in the eye and, speaking in perfect, fluent Arabic, the language of their insult and their reconciliation, she quoted Almutanabi back to him. "Ida Gamarat fi Sharif Maram, Falatakna Baima Duna al Nujum." Julian froze. This time the reaction wasn't shock, but a flash of deep recognition and a genuine, profound smile. Elena had chosen one of the poet's most famous lines, which translated to the universal theme of destiny and ambition. "If you venture into the pursuit of a noble goal, do not be satisfied with anything less than the stars." This was Elena's decisive action, a promise and a challenge. She was telling him that she saw his noble goal, success, respect, connection, and that she wouldn't settle for his lesser offer, a contract, a weapon. Julian replied, immediately in the same dialect, completing the emotional echo. He didn't quote poetry, but he used the language of their new, shared reality. "Walakin al-nujum la lak bi mufradaha, yalzamu al-qiyada." But the stars cannot be launched alone, leadership is required. He was admitting his need for her expertise, her qiyada, leadership, not just her service. He stepped closer, closing the last physical and emotional distance between them. "I came here to offer you a partnership, Elena. Not a contract. A partnership of equals. I need your mind, your insight, and your integrity at my side in every deal. And not just at the table." He paused, his dark eyes vulnerable. "I need you, the person who had the courage to tell me, in my own secret language, that I was empty inside." He reached out, not for her hand but for the tiny silver clasp on her blouse, the only piece of metallic color on her modest outfit. "I need the person who chose pride over millions. And I need the man who chose poetry over pride," Elena replied softly. "I accept your partnership, Julian." He didn't offer her a job. He didn't offer her a salary. He offered her a life. The unexpected love had blossomed from the wreckage of their contempt. The social divide, Waitress versus Billionaire, had been utterly collapsed by mutual intellectual respect. 3 weeks later, Elena Sanchez did not move back into her garden apartment. She moved into a beautiful, sun-drenched space that overlooked the lake, co-designed with Julian. Julian Thorne Global announced the formation of a new, highly specialized division, Thorne Global Cultural Strategy, with Elena Sanchez as its co-founder and head, retaining her title as a strategic consultant. Her first official act was to hire 3 of her former linguistics classmates to assist with the firm's rapidly growing portfolio. The resolution was complete. Elena had achieved total financial freedom and the validation of her genius, and Julian had found the only person in the world he couldn't buy, forcing him to learn the language of genuine connection. The last time Julian took Elena out to dinner, they went to the Meridian. Mark Peterson, pale but obedient, approached their table. "Welcome back, Mr. Thorne, Miss Sanchez." "It is an honor." Elena smiled graciously. Julian, his hand resting casually on hers, spoke softly in English. "Peterson, thank you. We'll need the same bottle of water, please. And this time, please ensure there are no interruptions. My cultural advisor here is very particular about her water service." He caught Elena's eye. She smiled, her eyes reflecting the victory of the stars she had never settled for. Her $100,000 in debt had bought her a master's degree, but a single drop of water had bought her a new, unpredictable, and powerful future. The love between Elena and Julian was built on intellectual respect and vulnerability, not on social status. What is the most important language or form of communication that you believe is necessary for any unexpected relationship to succeed? Share your final thoughts in the comments below.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.